Here's a question most people never ask themselves. What does your mind do when absolutely no one is watching? Not what you post online, not what you say in conversations, not the version of yourself you perform at work, at dinner, or in a group chat. What does your mind actually do when you're completely alone? Because if your answer involves replaying a conversation from 3 days ago, not to relive it, but to understand why you responded the way you did, if it involves sitting with a thought for hours without forcing a conclusion, if it means your brain quietly studies your own emotional reactions like data without anyone asking you to, then your mind is doing something most people's minds never do. Psychologists call this metacognitive awareness, the ability to watch your own thinking from the inside. And if you do the 9 things I'm about to describe when you're alone, your brain isn't just different. It's structured for a kind of self awareness most people will never develop. Not because they can't, but because they've never been still enough to notice. If you recognize yourself in what I just described, you've probably spent years being told that you think too much, analyze too much, or need to be more like everyone else. Maybe you were told that wanting time alone was avoidance, that preferring your own company meant you were cold, antisocial, or emotionally distant. And eventually, you may have started believing it. But what if your solitude was never a problem to fix? What if it's simply the way your mind is designed to process, reflect, and understand the world? The guilt you feel about being alone often comes from people who think differently, people who rely on constant conversation and external stimulation. You are not one of those people. And that's not a flaw, it's cognitive independence. The 9 behaviors you're about to discover are signs of that independence evidence that your mind operates with an internal authority most people never develop. Number one, you think through problems alone before asking anyone. Some people's first instinct when they face a difficult situation is to immediately call someone, text a friend, get a group reaction, outsource the discomfort of uncertainty to someone else's opinion. Your instinct is different. You sit with it first, you hold the problem in your mind and turn it around. You look at it from angles that other people never consider. You let yourself feel frustrated, then calm down, then think again and again. Not because you don't value other people's perspectives, but because something in you refuses to accept an answer you haven't personally tested. Psychologists call this internal locus of control, the belief that your own reasoning is worth trusting before you seek external validation. This is rare, not because people are incapable of doing this, but because most people find the discomfort of thinking alone genuinely unbearable. They'd rather get a quick answer from someone else than sit in the uncertainty of their own mind. But you've learned to sit in it. And over time, that patience has built something inside you that most people don't have: a relationship with your own judgment, a quiet confidence in your ability to reason without a safety net. That's not overthinking, that's cognitive independence in action. Number two, you replay conversations to study your own patterns, not to judge others. Think about what most people do after a difficult interaction. They replay the conversation, but not to understand themselves. They replay it to prove they were right, to build imaginary arguments they could have won, to quietly congratulate themselves on their position. Now, think about what you do. When you replay a conversation in your mind, you're usually not thinking about the other person. You're thinking about yourself. Why did I respond that way? What was I actually feeling underneath my words? Was my reaction proportional, or did something deeper get triggered? You're studying your own emotional architecture in real time without anyone asking you to. This is not guilt. This is not self punishment. This is metacognitive processing at its most functional level. Most people never do this, not because they lack intelligence, but because they've never been taught that self observation is even a skill. And here's what I want to ask you: how many times have you replayed a conversation not to relive the moment, but to figure out something about yourself that nobody else would even notice? If the answer is more than you can count, drop that number in the comments, because I promise you other people reading those comments are going to feel a lot less alone. Number three, you notice your own emotions before they fully arrive. There is a specific kind of awareness that most people never develop. It's the ability to feel an emotion rising and simultaneously observe it from a slight distance. You don't just feel anger. You notice the anger arriving. You don't just feel sadness. You recognize the exact moment it shifts from discomfort to something heavier. And you do this without trying, without therapy, without anyone prompting you or handing you a framework. It just happens. Your mind watches itself move through emotional experiences. And because of that, you rarely get completely swept away. You feel deeply, but you also understand what you're feeling while it's happening. Psychologists call this emotional granularity, the ability to differentiate between subtle emotional states with precision. And research consistently shows that people who possess this ability tend to have stronger emotional regulation, better self awareness, and a fundamentally different relationship with their own inner world. But here's what nobody tells you about this ability: it can be exhausting, because when your mind is constantly observing itself, rest becomes something your brain doesn't naturally offer you. Stay with me here, because behavior number four goes even deeper. Number four, you revisit old memories to reinterpret them, not to relive them. Most people store memories like old photographs. They look at them occasionally, feel a wave of nostalgia, and move on. The meaning of the memory stays fixed at the moment it was formed. But your mind doesn't work that way. You return to old experiences, not because you're stuck in the past, but because your present mind sees things your younger self couldn't. You suddenly realize that a conversation from years ago had a completely different meaning than what you originally understood. You recognize now that someone's reaction wasn't about you at all. You see patterns in your own behavior that you were blind to at the time. This is not rumination. This is cognitive flexibility operating at its highest level. Your brain is actively reorganizing its understanding of the past based on who you've become. And that process is something most people never experience because their interpretation of their own life story stays frozen. Yours keeps evolving. And here's the psychology behind why that matters. People with high metacognitive awareness don't just learn from new experiences, they relearn from old ones. Their past becomes a living dataset that continues to offer insight long after the event has ended. That's not living in the past, that's extracting wisdom from it. Number five, you test your own beliefs by building the strongest argument against them. Think about what happens in most people's minds when they hold a belief. They protect it, they look for evidence that confirms it, they surround themselves with people who agree with them, and the moment that belief is challenged, they get defensive. Now think about what you do. When you're alone and thinking deeply about something you believe, you don't just defend it, you attack it. You build the strongest possible case against your own position, not to destroy it, but to test whether it can survive scrutiny. Psychologists call this active self opposition, and it is one of the rarest cognitive habits that exists. Because most people confuse this with self doubt, but they're not the same thing. Self doubt asks, am I good enough? Active self opposition asks, is my thinking accurate? One undermines you, the other sharpens you. And if you regularly find yourself alone, genuinely trying to prove yourself wrong about something you care about, you possess a kind of intellectual honesty most people will never develop. So here's my question for you. Have you ever changed your mind about something important, not because someone convinced you, but because you convinced yourself through your own thinking? If yes, what was it? Drop it in the comments. Because that kind of honesty is what separates surface level opinions from actual understanding. Number six, you feel more yourself in solitude than in most social situations. There's a version of yourself that exists around other people. It's not fake, exactly, but it's edited, filtered, adjusted to fit the social context you're in. And then there's the version of yourself that exists when you're completely alone. That version doesn't perform, doesn't adjust, doesn't calculate how to respond. It just exists. And for you, that second version feels more real, not because you're antisocial, not because you dislike people, but because solitude removes the pressure to manage how you're being perceived. And in that space, your mind finally gets to operate the way it was designed to. Psychologists call this authentic self access, the ability to connect with your internal experience without the interference of social performance. And here's what's interesting about people who have this: they're often better in relationships, not worse, because they know the difference between their real thoughts and their social adaptation. They're not confused about who they are, they're just selective about when and with whom they show it. Most people never develop that clarity because they define themselves entirely through external feedback. They need other people to tell them who they are. You don't, you already know. Now, pause here for a moment. Because if you've recognized yourself in most of these behaviors, something else has probably happened too. You spent a significant part of your life being misunderstood. People have told you that you're cold because you don't share every thought, that you're difficult because you ask too many questions, that you're distant because you need time alone to process. And at some point, you may have started wondering if they were right, if maybe something really was wrong with you. But here's the truth: what looked like a problem from the outside was actually your intelligence doing exactly what intelligence is supposed to do: working, processing, building understanding in private before expressing it publicly. The criticism you received wasn't accurate. It was a description of ordinary minds encountering a mind that operates differently. And there's a specific reason this happens. Most people process externally. They think out loud. They need conversation to organize their thoughts. They use other people as mirrors to understand themselves. But you process internally. You think in silence. You organize before you speak. You use your own mind as the mirror. Neither is better, but they are fundamentally different. And when someone who processes externally meets someone who processes internally, they often misread silence as emptiness, reflection as coldness, independence as rejection. So let me ask you this: what's the worst thing someone ever said to you about your need for alone time? And looking back now, do you still believe they were right, or do you see it differently? Share that in the comments, because I guarantee someone else has heard the exact same thing and felt the exact same confusion. Number seven, you get curious about things that offer you no practical benefit. Most people learn transactionally. They consume information that helps them earn more, look smarter, solve an immediate problem, or impress someone. And the moment that utility disappears, so does their curiosity, but you're different. You find yourself alone, deep into a topic that has absolutely no practical value to your life. Maybe it's the psychology of color perception. Maybe it's how ancient languages structured time differently than modern ones. Maybe it's just a question that won't leave your mind, even though answering it changes nothing, and you can't let it go. Not because it's useful, but because something in you is genuinely fascinated. Psychologists call this intrinsic intellectual drive, and it's one of the clearest signals of a cognitively independent mind. Because here's what that reveals about you: your mind hasn't been fully domesticated by utility. It still follows what's interesting rather than just what's productive. It still explores for the sake of exploration. And that freedom, that refusal to only think in terms of outcomes, that's rarer than almost any credential you could put on a resume. Because most people's curiosity died the moment someone asked them, "What's the point?" Yours didn't. Number eight, you catch yourself mid thought and voluntarily change direction. Think about how most people think. Once they commit to a mental path, they follow it all the way to the end, even if halfway through they realize it's leading nowhere. Even if the logic starts breaking down, they keep going because changing direction mid thought feels like admitting they were wrong, and their ego won't allow it. But you do something different. You catch yourself in the middle of a thought, recognize that your reasoning was incomplete or biased, and you redirect. Without drama, without shame, you just adjust. This is called real time intellectual agility. And it's something formal education almost never teaches, because schools reward people who defend their answers. But real intelligence isn't about defending, it's about updating. And the ability to do that in private, with no one watching, with no external pressure forcing you to admit a mistake, that's a level of intellectual honesty most people never develop. Here's what I want to know. Have you ever been mid sentence in your own head and stopped yourself because you realized your own logic didn't hold up? And did that feel like growth or did it feel like failure? Because how you answer that question says everything about whether you're protecting your ego or protecting the truth. Drop your answer in the comments. Number 9, you mentally simulate conversations before they happen, not out of anxiety, but out of preparation. Most people walk into situations and react in the moment. They respond based on whatever emotion hits them first. And then later, alone, they think, I wish I'd said this differently. You do the opposite. Before an important conversation, your mind runs simulations, not obsessively, not anxiously, but deliberately. You think through how the other person might respond. You consider multiple angles. You test different approaches in your head. You imagine outcomes. And by the time the conversation actually happens, you're not improvising, you're executing. Psychologists call this advanced internal modeling. Your brain builds invisible maps of social and emotional possibilities before reality even arrives. And here's why that matters. This is not overthinking. Overthinking is repetitive, circular, and unproductive. This is strategic cognition. It's your mind preparing itself for complexity. And the reason highly intelligent people often seem calm in situations that stress others out, it's because they've already mentally walked through dozens of versions of that situation before it happened. So, final question. Do you mentally rehearse difficult conversations before they happen? And has anyone ever told you that's overthinking when you know it's actually just thinking? Let me know in the comments because I want to know how many of you have been mislabeled your entire life. So let's bring this all together. If you do most or all of these 9 things when you're alone, here's what that actually means. Your mind is not broken, it's not damaged, it's not overthinking or avoiding or shutting down. Your mind is cognitively independent. It doesn't need external validation to process information. It doesn't need constant conversation to organize thoughts. It doesn't need noise to feel okay. It has an internal authority that most people never develop. And that authority allows you to do something most minds can't. You can sit with uncertainty without panicking. You can question your own beliefs without your identity collapsing. You can observe your own emotions without being controlled by them. You can be alone without feeling lonely. And that's not a flaw, that's a structure, a design, a way your brain was built to operate. Now, here's the part nobody tells you. The world is not designed for minds like yours. It's designed for people who process externally, who need groups, who think out loud, who find silence uncomfortable. And because of that, you've probably spent years trying to fit into systems that were never built for you. You've been told to speak up more, to stop thinking so much, to just go with the flow, to stop being so serious. And every time you heard that, a small part of you wondered if they were right. But they weren't. They were just describing what happens when a mind that needs external stimulation meets a mind that generates its own. And the fact that you've survived this long without losing yourself, without abandoning your need for depth, for solitude, for internal clarity, that's not weakness, that's strength. Because most people give up on themselves the moment the world tells them they're different. They flatten, they conform, they stop thinking deeply because it's easier to think shallowly, but you didn't. You kept your mind intact. You kept questioning. You kept processing. You kept sitting with the hard stuff, even when no one was watching. And that quiet refusal to become ordinary, that's what cognitive independence actually looks like. If this video felt like it was describing you, do 2 things. Subscribe to the channel because this is for people who think deeply, feel deeply, and thrive in solitude. And then answer this in the comments.